Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that author or book that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt for a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you either those authors or books that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today in episode 48, I bring to you author Akil Smith. We're going to go over a little bit about who he is, what he's published, what he's working on, and maybe what his plans are for the future. Welcome to the show, Akil.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm happy to have you here today. Why don't we begin? Why don't you give an introduction to yourself to the viewers?
So, my name is Akil Smith. As Adrian said, I am a new independent author. I just released my first book called Alum Beginnings, which is this wonderful thing. Just recently awarded Best Book Cover Design, so I'm very happy about that. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I moved around a lot, so my upbringing has kind of come up about as how do I say it, like expansive, and it's also helped out with what came up in my writing and how I view life and how I go about things, apart from being a big fat nerd. Well, not fat in a big sense, but more sense like I love science fiction. I love comic books, and it's definitely become very much a huge influence in my writing and how I tell stories.
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing when I do these podcasts and I ask the authors the questions. Next question we're going to talk about in a second is influences, but it is interesting because really it is those experiences, right? Like you said, the moving around, giving you more of a foundation. Loving sci-fi, I come from a huge horror movie background. I love horror movies from the original Universals to today's, and that influences my writing. So it's always interesting to hear all those influences and experiences that all the authors had that really make up their unique voice as an author. And that's really what I love about doing this podcast and meeting all you amazing authors for that reason, to hear all those different approaches.
Mm-hmm. Well, even for me, like film is also a really big thing, if I even have to include it. My favorite movie is Terminator 2. I watched that when I was like 7 years old. I know that's not a movie for kids, but if there's anything that kind of inspired me to also write, I think the thing that really pushed me over the edge to write, apart from Star Wars, is definitely Terminator. James Cameron's one of my favorite directors of all time, and the way how he does storytelling, the way how he shows visuals, the way how he does action, very much one of the reasons why I'm like, okay, yeah, I really want to have something that's cool as that, or have characters that are just as strong as that. Like strong female characters are very much in my story itself. So I want to be able to show that off as well, just the way how he did it.
Yeah. Do you find yourself writing kind of like as a movie is shot? Because one of the comments, I didn't realize I did it, but one of the comments I had on my book was, the book actually takes you like you're watching a movie. It's almost like you're doing the closed captions for a movie as you're watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even realize I wrote it that way, because when I write, I picture the story almost like I'm watching a movie, and I kind of write it that way. And I didn't even realize I wrote it in the structure of the thousands and thousands of horror movies that I've watched in the past. I didn't even realize I did that. When you write, because you love that cinematic side of it, right? The shots, the angles, the the framing of the scenes and stuff. Did you find yourself writing in that style?
Absolutely.
Kind of using that, yeah.
Absolutely. There's even with my next book I'm writing, I'm kind of diving deeper into it. But this book alone, I try to throw in visuals, but a lot of that inspiration for the visuals come from Harry Potter. Funny enough, because I like that book has visuals. Like one of my favorite parts in some of the Harry Potter books is like the newspaper sections. So if you read through a chapter and it will just split off to like a newspaper section, it feels like you are a character in that world and you're reading what they're reading, that's one really cool thing. But the other thing, of course, is like it is that visual, but mostly like I want my reader to feel like they are a part of the story, but also at the same time like they are watching the film. And I haven't gotten anybody to say exactly what they told you, which is, man, I really feel like I'm watching a movie, considering that's one of my big inspirations for this book cover anyway. I originally drew it. I had somebody redo the cover in a way that well, kind of very much in the same way I wanted it to be, and far better artist than I am. But nonetheless, I said, hey, do this. I want it to look like a movie poster. So when somebody picks this up off of like a bookshelf, they'll say, hey, that looks like a movie. Let me go ahead and read it. And here we are. So I would hope I hear some more reviews where they come up and say like, yeah, that feels like a film. I was told there's a lot of visual elements that if you're reading it, you can really feel like you're in the scene, or you really seem like you're watching the scene as it plays out. And that actually feels really good to me, because one of my biggest fears is actually just being a person that just kind of tells the audience and doesn't really show, and it's so hard to describe showing the audience.
Yeah, it's crazy. You and I have a lot of similarities in how we approach that, or some of our background, right? The covers from my book too, I wanted a old 50s horror poster look, right? Like
Hmm.
something you would see in the old drive-in or the old theaters hanging, because I always thought those are artwork, right? I mean, they did a
Hmm.
beautiful job in those old horror posters of just giving you that story, and that's kind of what I want to do with all my books, right? Is do that. Somebody mentioned that it reminded them of Goosebumps, right? Kind of some of the Goosebumps things, because I have that retro horror look, right? So it's interesting that you went for kind of that movie poster scene too, because it really goes back to when movies are a big part of your foundation, right? And it
Hmm.
is for both of us. That's something you draw from. It really caught your eye seeing those old posters. Same thing with me, and that's the visual that you see when you're giving your voice to that book, right? So it's very interesting, the similarities there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so you talked a little bit about some of the genres and the stories and movies in general, but why don't you give us a little more of an idea about what creatively influences you?
What creatively influences me? Well, funny enough, if I want to talk about most recent, for sure. Thanks to Dune Part 2, I actually got reinvigorated into writing because I was in a bit of a slump. Not for too long, honestly. I try to write every week, but it was one of those moments where I was just like, I get it now. I get why every sci-fi author and filmmaker really sees this as like the creme de la creme, or the pinnacle of like where science fiction is supposed to be and how you're supposed to, build up on it. So I would say that's definitely the most recent inspiration. But when it comes down to full inspiration, it goes all the way back to actually my mom. I dreamt of that story that I have out now, and I dreamt of that story pretty much about 8, 10, 20 years ago. It's crazy to say that, but yeah, 20 years ago, that book came up as a dream. And with it becoming a dream, I used to tell my mom every time I used to go to school about this character and the things that he was doing, and he had a evil grandfather that wants his power and blah 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 blah. And she's like, it sounds like Star Wars. I'm like, it kind of is, but it's not Star Wars. And she just ended up saying like, what you should do every time you have these dreams, just write it down on paper. And of course, it would just pop up every now and then, to the point where I actually had a full-fledged tale from beginning to end, for what I wanted to do. Of course, the beginning is literally just this. That's all that beginning is. There's so much more stories to tell. So I have like 10 more books I want to go about. Big old spoiler, right? But overall, um, yeah, I had a good length of tales I want to tell in this series right off the bat. So that's beginning inspiration. But if it goes into other inspirations, definitely, as I said, Star Wars is one of them, because my mom said, "Hey, it sounds like Star Wars." And during the time I was 8 years old, the only two other movies that were coming out during that time was Episode 2 and Episode 3. They were only like 2-3 years apart, and of course, I was just really anticipating it. I grew up off of X-Men, the cartoon series. I'm actually really looking forward to '97, and And of course, anime. Nobody would have influenced anime more than my cousins, the family I grew up with. We watched that every Saturday, every Sunday, during the week, before school, after school. That was our routine. But when it comes to comic books like Marvel and stuff, that's all my mom, and they're my main inspiration, my main reason why I'm here and why I have this book out. And going into that nerdiness of Dragon Ball, where you're shooting energy beams out your hand and doing kung fu or karate. In this case, I want to say martial arts because it is mainly martial arts. Definitely inspires his story, and of course, we see that in Matrix and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And I can definitely say the story itself is very has those inspirations really baked into it. People will see that, hey, this person has a grandfather as evil. That sounds like Star Wars. Oh, this person has powers and shooting beams out their hand. That sounds like Dragon Ball. There's a lot of martial arts and fighting. That could be any anime. That could be Matrix. That could be whatever. But nonetheless, I will definitely say, like, as any other author, any sci-fi author, you're always going to be inspired by what was told to you from behind. And it's going to reflect into your work. Everything's going to sound like the previous work that you've already seen pop up at anywhere. Like Dune is Star Wars is Dune, and we can always say, oh, it's completely taken from it. But truthfully, is it on a basics? Yes, but on a very flushed out way, no. They're very vastly different.
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
go too far, but I can go
No, no.
hours.
I mean that it's great because it's interesting again because my growing up, I watched a lot because of my uncle, right? So you were talking about that. My uncle was a big influence for me, getting me into everything, and he started me at a young age with Japanese cinema, right? And a lot of people automatically think when they think of Japanese cinema, they automatically think the samurai movies, martial arts, and stuff, right? But
Mhm,
there's a whole range of Japanese cinema that are just dramas and classics, right? And they're just beautifully shot movies. So anybody who loves the way movies are shot, the storylines, how they're the story and the characters are placed in those things. Old Japanese movies are just works of art, right? They're just
mhm,
beautiful, beautiful pieces of work that were done. And it really goes back to, like you said, you have influences in your work. Lucas took a lot of the classic Japanese movies for Star Wars, right? Hidden Fortress, if you ever watch Hidden Fortress, and you look at the characters, it's basically Princess Leia, R2D2, C3PO, and Luke as the
mhm,
main characters in this samurai movie, right? Um, there's all these different things. Some of the other samurai movies that they did, the old spaghetti westerns that they used to call them, that Clint Eastwood was in, those are redos of the old samurai movies back that were in like the 40s or 50s, right? And that's really what it is. It's something that inspires you and takes you into your voice, your telling of it. Because is it the same movie? Absolutely not. I mean, Star Wars is so completely different from that original Japanese movie. But if you love Star Wars and have watched Star Wars and you watch Hidden Fortress, you know, part of the way through you're like, I know these four characters, right? I know exactly who these four characters are, and you can see how George Lucas took the inspiration, right? Lightsabers, it was the
mhm.
samurai sword, and he said, okay, let me put it in space and figure it out, right? So you're completely correct. It's all those things that you watched as a child, you know, things that you loved, comics that you read, you know, all that stuff that makes your unique individual voice. And then, you know, you take it from there, right? You take it in the direction you want to go. And, you know, we talked a little bit before I hit record on this podcast, and you made a good point because it's something I really appreciate when authors do. And that's when you want to come from a different angle, right? You talked about, I want to do some stuff differently from other authors, the way they're doing this or the way they're trying this. And I love that. I've always loved that approach. And it doesn't matter if it's music, you know, artwork, writing, anything. When somebody does it from a different way, doesn't try to do the same old, even though same old, you know, can be attacked from different angles. I appreciate that, right? I love when authors or any artist that really does that and comes from their own unique perspective, right? And so I appreciate when, like you're saying, you want to do that. I do appreciate when authors do that.
Mm. Thank you for that. It's one of those things that I live by, but it also shows up in the way how I did my cover too. Everything is it's supposed to be different. I already have a very strong detest on any novel that's released after like your children's novels. They have the very basic big author name, big logo of your book, and it's just like a generic background. So I just said no. I prefer back when you were a kid, you would see these beautiful artworks on your cover, and it looks nice, and they don't necessarily have to look like a movie poster, but they speak to you, they pull you in, because that's the one reason why I usually buy books. If there's anything that took me away from reading, anyways, because books look so bland. I don't want to look like everybody else's story on the shelves with maybe one or two characters because it's a sci-fi or fantasy novel holding a sword and looking determined.
Yeah,
Instead, it's better to have something that really, I guess, speaks words or speaks volumes or peaks out your interest. And
yeah,
that's definitely one thing that I want to show in all my work, no matter what.
yeah. I mean, it goes back to majority of the sales. Yeah, there's still bookstores now. You have Barnes and Noble. You have all the mom and pop bookstores, but primarily most of the shopping is done now online, right?
Hmm.
And when you're not there, you can't touch it. What's the first thing that's going to sell your book? That cover, right? So when you do want to stand out and keep yourself different, that's going to catch some eyes, and it's at least going to get them to click, right? That's your first your first hurdle is getting them to click on your book, right? And then it's your blurb or whatever details you have is your second to get them into the story. But when you do come from a different angle, you do come from your own approach, and you do give you know homage to that old classic poster style looks, or not even a poster, just the detailed beautiful artwork.
Hmm.
You make yourself stand out, right? And you are making an effort to take that step up on some of the other covers for them to click on it and see what the book's all about, right? So let's talk about your book. Why don't you let everybody know the name of your book and give us
Yeah.
kind of a quick summary or synopsis about what it's about.
So my book is called Allen Beginnings, and it's about these two characters known as Taisho and Sean. They're alien refugees here on Earth during the 1980s because there's a war happening between the Zorians and the Rigians. Taisho's a Zorian, and these red eyes are the Rigians. The Rigians are this vicious, nasty race that basically just want to eradicate everything that has to do with the Zorians and everybody that they're affiliated with. What that's all about, you would have to read a book. But since this is more grounded tale, it's about Taisho and Sean. So Sean, he has undergone a lot of loss over the course of time. Since he's a refugee, he lost his family, fleeing his home world, and then coming to Earth. All he had was his mom and his dad. But because of bigotry, because of hate, his dad was killed from Zorian extremists, and later on was his mom, or at least he thought so, because now in the present time of the story, his mom returns, but now as a Rigian, despite the fact that she's a part of the evil faction, a part of the reason why they're here on Earth right now. He sets everything to the side because he's pretty much had nobody except for his friends. His friends who became his family, and with joining her, she has a lot more stories to tell about why she disappeared, why she joined this other faction, and why she confides in them security versus the people that his her son trusts. And through anger, through just crazy thrashing emotion, Taisho makes a horrible decision that separates both Taisho and Sean from being friends anymore. Sean is starting to find out more so about Taisho and the people that he's associated with. His guardian might be behind the death of his father, and he wants to figure out all that. But Taisho, on the other hand, feels like his best friend is being manipulated by the Rigians, his mom, and other people. And so he doesn't really care whether or not by the end of this, his best friend accepts him again. He just wants to save him, but he's also trying to uncover what's the reason why he's attacking or trying to find out his mother's past. And he wants to do it before anything gets worse. And that's pretty much the whole premise of the story without giving too much away.
Yeah. I never wanted to give too much away on that side. Um, so you say this takes place in the 80s. Did you do a lot of research for the 80s or for
Yes,
the
I have
storyline to
to.
make sure that the time period was built right?
Yeah, I had to. It was very important to focus on 80s, but unlike any other story that has a story in the 80s and wants to show off, hey, this is what happened in the 80s, I really want to focus on the characters, but show off other things. Like, for instance, the first chapter in this book, I had to look for what was the hottest things, the hottest music being played during that time. And the thing, of course, I thought in my head was, I want a visual that tells people this is taking place in like this certain year. And I felt the best way I can do that is through music. And I found a song called Mountains by Prince. And I use that as the way to tell my reader, this is not your present day story. This is definitely taking place in the past. And there's a good reason why I want it to take place in the past. And I felt like that was actually the best way to do it rather than saying it's 19 such and such and this is what's happening and blah 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 blah. It was just better to be like, here's a year based off this music. Here's how he's. I'm not gonna dress him up in like bell bottom jeans um or a tank top that's super tight. I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'll just show it more in terms of music, the way how they carry themselves, and technology. The fact that we don't have the computer that we have right now makes more sense to be like, hey, well, they're not using computers. They have a tube TV, which is something I grew up with, so I understood that.
Yeah.
Uh, they're driving a regular old car. Traffic's kind of bad still in New York, and they're not thinking of, hey, can I text somebody? In fact, there's even a part in the book where one of the girls has to run to a payphone, like a good old classic payphone. So yeah, I did enough research, even from the fact that like when I lived in New York, I knew a lot of these things still existed during the time. So I'm like, they have to be around all of them, and at least even till this day, I think they're still around, but they're not physically inside their casing. So I didn't need to do some research just for certain parts to make sure that it always did its job to let people know, hey, this is where we are, this is the setting. And if somebody thinks, oh, they can just do this or they can do that, it's out of the questions. I'm already letting the reader know, no, we're kind of
Yeah.
stuck here. They're kind of
Wasn't
limited.
available, right? Yeah. So in this book, did you have a favorite scene? Something that stands out to you?
Yes, I do. And it came from a character I did not expect to write. Because if there's anything I can say about, and even my next book is, I write outlines for all these stuff years on end. I wrote my outline for this back in 20. I'm about to say 2008, but it's 2008 when I finally came up with an idea. Like, okay, this, well, not my fault. Like, I took my little writings, gathered an idea, and said, all right, this is what the chapters are going to be. I created this character named Azuka, and I created this character named Tulsa. And I love this scene where I have Taisho being trained by Azuka on how to get rid of the Rigian gene. And to introduce these characters, I have kind of like a switch between both them, or both Asuka and Tulsa, as they're interacting with their counterpart, like the main character Taisho, and for Tulsa, her old friend, also Taisho's guardian, Kevin, and having them kind of basically ask questions, get a little bit of backstory about those characters, and bounce off of how this person reacts and how they play off, and how this person reacts and how they play off. So I'm furthering the plot as well as like building up who they are in a short amount of time. And this one chapter, and it's one of my favorite chapters. I always read it and I have a lot of fun with it because it makes me feel, one, I guess, proud as an author because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I really love this chapter, but I'm like, I shouldn't be so I'm gonna use Kanye West as a good example, but I don't want to be like so self-centered. Uh, but at the same time, it's really cool to like read through it and be like, I actually feel like I'm connecting to these characters, and they were just introduced literally a chapter ago, and I
Yeah.
love that. And going into this next book, I'm pretty sure people are gonna see exactly the same thing without trying to give too much away.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
that's one thing I love from this one book. I think people would actually really really enjoy.
yeah. I mean, and it's not a bad thing to be proud of your work, right? Because for all of us, these are all passion projects, right? These are things we love. We love to do. it's a work from the heart that you wrote, because unfortunately, not a lot of us are making money from this to have it as a career. So we
Hmm.
do it because we love it, right? It's something we truly love. So absolutely be proud of something that you did, that you just, you feel it. You feel that, yeah, it did what you wanted it to do. And it really goes back to, again, if you're feeling it, right? Even after you wrote it and you're feeling it as you're rereading it, then the reader's going to connect with it, right? So that is a great scene or a great chapter for that reason. If it's still giving you the emotions and the connection, then the readers are going to feel the same thing. On the opposite side of that, did you have a scene in the book or chapter or whatever that was hard? Maybe
Yes,
something that was hard to bring together, or however you want to interpret that.
yes, there was. In fact, it was one of my chapters I had to break into a couple chapters before releasing this book, and it was a point where I was reading and saying like, "Oh my god, this is." First, it was hard. It wasn't hard to write. It was a heavy exposition, but I want to say like I'm describing everything that's happening. It's more like I'm trying to get it point A to point. As I call it, a point A to point B chapter, where your chapter starts off doing something and it has to end off doing something to get to an action. And there's so much between point A and point B where I was just like, yo, am I overfilling myself with information? Am I losing myself? And reading through it after a couple of times, I just said, yeah, this is not working out. So I had to cut some portions. I had to split the chapter, and I had to just say, okay, is it working better now? And it's one of my later chapters in my book, but not like in my. I've split my book up into 3 acts, so it's more of my second act, and it's one of my stronger chapters, but it still was a challenge and a hassle when it comes. That's one of them, to be honest with you. So as energy wise, I felt like that was the hardest, but difficulty wise, it was the end of my second act chapter. It's this chase scene that I wanted to write, and having to abide by the rules that I set myself up into for this world, considering that I wanted to use a mindset of, okay, well, my characters are living amongst other humans during the 1980s. I want it to be based more closer to reality. If it's gonna be based more in reality, nobody's gonna know about these other alien people. So how do they hide within other people? I mean, they can make casual mistakes, maybe knock over a person, maybe fight somebody. But I'm like, we're in New York. People are either gonna say like, "Are you good? Are you okay?" And they'll just leave them alone because we see some things as kind of how do I say it? Random and weird every single day. So this is just one of those random and weird every single day moments. It's like, okay, somebody got punched out. Is he cool? All right, let's move on. But it's one of those hard things where it's like, okay, kind of make tension of a chase chapter where people are literally walking slow. And I thought back to an episode of Star Trek Next Generation where there's so much tension in these characters walking from one end of the ship to the other. And that's literally it. It's just them walking from one end of the ship to the other while one is holding a gun to the other person. It's like, and there's just so much tension in it. There's not quick cuts or fast camera actions or whatever. It's just one long shot. And I look at this last fight scene and be like, or this last chase scene to be like one long shot, but also having that same amount of tenseness. And I think I did a good job doing it. But overall, it was just I remember saying to myself, I'm like, man, I'm writing this and I don't feel the emotion of, oh my god, this person might be right behind me, and I don't think somebody's gonna be reading it and go like, so is dude really right behind the person, or they're got to like catch them? It's only after I finished the chapter and I got through my little fight scene, I said, yes, that was actually really good. But that was the most difficult chapter to write, and it's one of those things I still feel in my second book.
Yeah. So let's talk about, usually I like to ask, what are you currently working on? You kind of mentioned that you're working on book two.
Yeah.
And I think you said earlier you're thinking of this being a multiple book series, correct?
Hmm.
Okay. So first, before we discuss that, um, again, without giving anything away or saying too much, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about what your current work is in book two?
So book two takes place 5 years after this one, after Beginnings, and it has to deal with a certain child to be born. And because now I want to make the stakes bigger in a certain way, but also kind of be a part two to part one of this, because I do see this book and the book I'm writing now as like a part one, part two, versus like this is the first book and this is the second book. They're two halves of a whole. I wanted to have Taishio and his family against the Rickians as a whole, but have like a figurehead. And I really wanted to make this next book really show off this figurehead and also show some anxiousness when it comes to this child that's supposed to be born. And that's as much as I can give into it, because this one has I would honestly say once you read it, it has enough spoilers in the first 3 chapters that I can't give it away for what's going to happen in this book at all. And people, when they get to the next book, they're going to be like, oh my god. That's how I feel about it. I explained it to a couple of friends of mine. I said, when you finish this first book and you get into the next book, you're gonna be like, how the hell? And then they're gonna continue from there, and they're gonna have their little breaks, and they keep going from there. And the most important for me, if there's anything I could say about
Akil, I think your audio went out.
how about now?
Yeah, you're back now.
I think my battery's dying, just in case.
Okay.
I'll keep an eye on it just in case. I can always switch over to the computer. So
yeah, you did one of those dramatic pauses where you say my book's going through and the audio like cut out.
I'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep it fast, but yeah, overall, I want people. I'm a big fan of Apocalypse as a character.
It went out again.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, you're back now.
Here we go. So yeah, I'm a big
And don't forget, I can edit all this out, so not a worry.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of villains, and for me, it's really important to make this next book have a really compelling villain, and also very much change the mindset of your typical your typical villain, because everybody expects a certain type of villain when you have a certain type of character. If your character's growing, you're gonna have an older villain. This villain is gonna be younger. It'll be a teenage villain, and I'm expecting to get some backlash. I'm expecting to have some people say, "Oh, he's just a whiny brat," but when they really dive into the character, they'll understand that maybe he's not a whiny brat. In fact, he's very much about his business, no matter what. So now, before I go too much into it,
Yeah, again, I don't want you to go that far. But again, I appreciate it because you are coming from a different direction, right? And you are, like you're saying, you go with a younger villain. And, I think it's valid. I think it's a valid take. And it'd be interesting to see how the direction you take that with it, right? So how many, and this is always kind of a fluid question, but how many books do you envision now? Was it the same number you originally thought about? Because that changes all the time. And do you have a feeling that, as you've gone through them, it could be something that expands even more?
I definitely see expansion, but at least for just the Alum series as a whole, it'll just be 10. But I do see a future going beyond that story. I do see it as like a sequel series rather than, I don't like calling it a spinoff. I want to say it's a sequel series already happened. I created back in high school, and I have 6 books of those kind of already planned out. Those can change. That can easily change anytime from here on out. But mostly for this, it's always been exactly the same, and it's mostly because I already had that written out, planned out. I know where it's supposed to begin. I know where it's supposed to end. I know where the middle is supposed to go, and the whole concept of the character that I'm following right now to where he's supposed to where he's going to end up by the end of the series, and that's something I don't want to give away. I would love to see in the future of the series, as global as can get. I want to see a bunch of YouTube videos of somebody saying, here's the history, or here's the tale, or the methodology behind the character of Taisha Taylor, and everything they've gone about from beginning to end, and somebody is saying, wow, this is very akin to this type of religion or this type of lifestyle, or even related to the Hero with 1,000 Faces, where they have your main hero is kind of like neglecting his what he's meant to do, and then finally going to the call of action. I would love to see videos like that, because it'll improve me as an author, but also make me feel like, okay, if somebody is able to recite what I originally wanted to do with this character, word for, not even really word for word, but as close as possible, like 90%, then I feel like I've achieved my goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question, being that, you do love Star Wars, comics and stuff like that. Do you feel, or have you planned on this world, right? You're saying that it happens really on Earth with the humans, but the world that you kind of built around where these aliens are part of, are you going to make it where that world is a part of all your books? Or like you said, you have the other ones that you don't want to really call spin-offs. Are you going to feel that you're going to take it slightly a different direction?
So with first talking about the series, I do plan on taking it outer space, but I do want, like, I have it split up into two different halves, but overall the whole concept is always to keep it very much grounded into its characters and not so much into its world, because the thing I think I really pride myself on, and it's weird because I originally always thought of it as like an expansive, huge story. It's still a space opera at the end of the day. It just happens to be on Earth, and it's one of those things I had to combat myself with already with this book. I said, can I call it a sci-fi novel? Because it takes place on Earth, but we have stories that take place on Earth and it's sci-fi. But I do want to take it outside of where it's at now eventually. But for now, I want to keep everything grounded to, here's Earth, here's these characters, but I want to, little by little, each book, I want to show my readers there is other people out there. There's space out there. There's other planets. I want them to visualize and see, like, holy crap, there is more. Because when you read this first book, you're gonna feel like, okay, there's a lot of world out there. But I like the fact that it's keeping to its characters. It's not focused on the greater war that's happening. It's focused on the internal war that's happening between Taisha and Sean. And then further on, you'll see this story gradually progress. And in fact, it's almost like you as a reader are growing up, not in a physical sense, but more so in like the expansive sense with the other characters, that you realize that there is so much more going on out there, but now it's starting to, like Taisha, become a part of his lifestyle, or become a part of what's affecting him. And as for the sequel series, I do want to make it very different than this one. So it's still going to be sci-fi, but I want to do something that's kind of inspired me already more in my older years. So that's what made the book kind of change up. That's why I say, like, I have an idea for 6, but it could probably turn into 3. I do want to make it still character based, but I really want to make it very expansive. I really want people to read this and kind of understand the idea of, I don't know, I'm thinking in my head, what's not the term, but more so like devastation, or a apocalyptic type of story. I want to do something like that and really make it on a grander scale, because you've always seen apocalyptic tales, but I want to show it on a really big scale, and also show the aftermath of it, because we've always seen post-apocalyptic, we've seen pre-apocalyptic. Now I want to show apocalyptic going into what can happen after, especially on the scale of what this series is at. But we're not there yet. We have another probably like 16 years to get to that point. So until then, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm pretty sure, when a lot of people start picking up this wonderful story, they're going to be looking forward to where this series is going to lead on to. And definitely, like everybody else that read Dune back in the 70s, say, I get it, and I like the story. It's actually bigger than I expected, and
Yeah.
these stories challenge me no matter what.
And that's the best part of it, right? It keeps you engaged with it. It keeps you going because you can plot all you want. You can get it all set up, but when you're in it, the story kind of goes on its own, right? You're following with it, and that's what keeps you in it, right? That's what keeps the blood pumping. That's what keeps the inspiration flowing. Is that when you're in it, you're like the reader. You're going
Mhm.
along for the ride, and that's the beauty of it.
Agreed.
Yeah. So um, in the future, right? I usually like to ask, goals or plans for the future. So you have a big a big plan already in terms of this series and the possible other one. So say 20 years down the line, 25 years down the line, this entire 10 book series has come out. The other possible three to six book series is out. Is there something at some point you really want to attempt or write, be it a different genre or a different type of storyline that's kind of different than what you're doing right now?
So funny enough, I know since I already accepted the fact this is going to take me most of my 20s to 50s, or I'll be like 50 by the time I finish this. There's no possible way after I'm 50 I'm going to be writing anything more than that. So I also accepted the fact that I'm going to be a very busy, very mindful author. And I've already, this year alone, once I finish the sequel to this book, I do want to dive into another book that I consider to be like my big passion project. It's the one that I call it my passion project because it's the one that challenges me the most. And I hate calling it a romance story, but it is a romance story. It is but I want to say drama because it's all about the person, the one, and but I call it a romance story because it does have to deal with like a person with another person falling in love with each other. But I don't want to say the ending, but because I already have that in my head. But overall, I wanted to take a certain type of tale like romance and turn it on its head. And in many ways, I kind of say like, I want to make it more realistic. I want to make it more in terms of time. I want to make a story that's kind of like, how we see 1984. Even though that tale, the reason why that year is completely dated, we can always see that always imprint onto us anytime in our years, despite the fact that it's stuck in one point in time. I want to make a tale that also kind of is like a time capsule, so that in the future, somebody reads this book, they're going to look at it and say, this is how men and women, maybe they dealt with stuff, or I don't want to make the most perfect guy. I don't want to even want to write the most perfect girl. I really want to write a flawed man that has gone through crap and trying to find himself. And as well, I want to write a woman that understands that she's gone through crap, but not really understanding that how to get better from it. And it's the story I really want to tell. And that's the next book I'm going to be writing after I finish this second one. And I do want to dive into poetry. I do a lot of poetry already. I took a bit of a break, but I liked coming back to it because if there's anything I like to go off of sci-fi, I want to go into romance, I want to go into poetry. And one of the big ones I really want to hit once I finally get the chance to is to get into detective stories, true crime. I love true crime. I like espionage as well, but I don't think I could do it as best as I could to have like this great crazy plan for these spies going into something. I really don't want to make an ever long series like that.
Yeah.
But true crime is something I would really like to dive deep into. But that also comes from the fact that I love films like how do I say, like, I want to say Scarface. I want to say like Heat, some of the old 1950s films. Those ones they always speak to me. And I always like how they always told a story, and it's always focused on the one.
They were
main
great
character.
movies, right?
Yeah.
They were great movies. Even when they, how do I say this right? Even when they weren't great movies, they were great movies because
Mhm.
there was always something you took away from the movie, right? Even if it was a B movie, just the way it was written, some of the old dialogue from those movies, some of the ways it was shot, some of the ways the scenes were framed. They're
Mhm.
just great movies to watch, right? And it really gives you that whole feel of what a movie should be. And when you look at some of those old ones, because you didn't have effects, you didn't have a lot of stuff to play with that you have now. So they really had to figure out, how do I do this, right? How do I do this to give you those feelings, those emotions, get you through the storyline? Because nobody back then was sitting through a 3 hour movie or coming back for part two, really. You had to get everything in that hour 15, hour 20, whatever some of those older movies were. So there's just a lot of skill that was in those movies, even when the movie itself was not great. So
Mm-hmm.
much to take away from a lot of those old classics.
Agreed. Very, very much agreed.
Yeah. And then poetry is always a great thing. Same thing for me. At some point, I want to do a poetry collection. But poetry is something I've done since I was a kid, but it's something I noticed, and I don't know if it's the same for you. It's a good reset, right? It's a good reset when you're in the middle of these books, you're in the middle of these big stories, and all these words and chapters. And sometimes you don't say you get burnt out, but when you're rereading it over and over and over, sometimes you need that small reset, right? And
Mm-hmm.
poetry's always been a good reset because it completely changes your mindset to write that, to go into that side of it and write. And then you always, come back slightly revived, right? When you go back into your work, because that's taking you in a different direction, whether you're doing it from a writing prompt or just writing poetry in general from whatever you feel called to. But it's a good reset. It's always a good reset for any writers that do it when they need that break, right? Because sometimes you just need that break because you've been writing and writing and writing and rewriting and editing and rereading and let me change this and let's do this. And it's always a really good way to just take you out of that moment and then let you come back refreshed.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and that's something I've noticed too. And I'm pretty sure next year when I do my next 2, 3 projects, I do want to release a poetry book. I already have a group of poems that's been sitting in my phone for a while, and I have them grouped up. All I have to do is just kind of comb through it, edit it, and draw. As I like, one of the things I usually like to do, as I already said, I like to design my own covers and then hand it off to somebody that's way better than I am to make a digital cover because I have my own tablet. I'm trying to learn how to do it on there, but I do it the classic way. I pull out a paper, I draw it, I color it, I say this is what I want, and then if you can make it better. So that's more than likely what I'm going to do for these next couple books anyway. So look for that for next year.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to everything you have coming up. It's like I said, I appreciate the way you're coming from different angles, a different approach in terms of what you want to do. And I appreciate, you wanting to take on something that is going to take you. You already know, like you said, I want to be in my 50s when I finish, or hopefully when I finish this entire collection. So I appreciate that type of dedication for that story. And I really hope everything comes out great for you in that. And I'm looking forward to all the different books that are coming out in the series.
Thank you.
I just want to remind the viewers below that I will leave in the description all the links for Akil. I'll leave the links for his books, website, socials, anything he wants to share. So you'll be able to find his work and find him. If you guys have any comments for either of us, leave it down below. If you just have a question or want to ask us anything further about our books or our works, we'd be happy to answer those. And definitely don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all these amazing indie authors that are coming up. I always like to say again, there's a lot of talk out there, that they talk about traditionally published, indie published, self published, and the way a book comes out is not equal to the talent or skill of the writing or the book because I've met so many indie authors like yourself that the skill level, the talent level, the story is just they're amazing works of art, right? And it's a shame you got a lot of times that people don't understand that it doesn't have to be traditionally published to be a great book, right? And a great story. So
Agreed.
that's why I keep doing this for you guys to get eyes on your product because all your work is valid, right? Your voice is valid, your works are valid, and they should be seen by a lot more people. And I appreciate you coming on today, Akil. Learning about you in general. This is something I love about this podcast is meeting all you authors like this because hopefully when the viewers watch it, it's that connection to the author that gets built, right? Because whether there's just an author photo or small about the author or whatever, no one really understand the connection, right? And this hopefully builds that connection because they see why you wrote it, what influenced you to write it, the passion you have for it, the dedication you're going to put into this entire, series, and that's when the readers will really understand. You get more of that connection to your work. So I really do appreciate you coming on.
I'm glad you had me. I'm really, really glad you had me.
Yeah,
But of course,
I
I
like I
agree with
said,
everything
I'm
you think
looking
you
forward
said
to
too.
everything you have coming out and to see where the series goes. Uh, Viewers, again, thank you for watching and hope you guys enjoyed this. Goodbye.